Something happened during this year's NFL draft that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. Not the picks themselves, not the trades, not the war rooms. What I keep coming back to is a hotel room somewhere, a brother extending his stay day after day, watching rounds tick by without a phone call coming, feeling a kind of helpless pain that doesn't have a clean name. And the person at the center of all of it, Shedeur Sanders, just sitting there, waiting, composed, refusing to break. That image tells you everything you need to know about what kind of person we're actually dealing with here. Because here's the thing about the draft that people don't talk about enough. The first round is easy to watch. Everybody loves a celebration, a commissioner's handshake, a hat, a smile that can't be contained. That's a great moment, and it should be. But the real character test? That's not in round 1. That's when round 1 ends without your name. When round 2 ends. When round 3 bleeds into 4, and 4 bleeds into 5, and every single hour becomes its own public verdict delivered in silence. That is where you find out who someone actually is. And what Shedeur Sanders showed the football world across those agonizing hours is something that people with real standing in this league immediately recognized and are now openly talking about. Let me start with Jarvis Landry, because when someone of his tenure says something publicly about a young player, it isn't noise. Landry has been around long enough to understand exactly how this league operates, how the media machine works around draft season, how young prospects get handled, and what it looks and feels like when a process is fundamentally stacked against someone. And what Landry said about Shedeur was direct in a way that stopped me cold. He said Shedeur never had a fair shot, and he wasn't speaking in generalities. He was talking specifically about the pre-draft interview process, about the nature of questions being directed at Shedeur in those meetings that had nothing to do with football evaluation. Think about that for a second. These aren't questions about scheme comprehension, processing speed, or situational decision-making. These are questions specifically engineered to destabilize a young man, to get him to say something damaging about Coach Prime, to manufacture friction between him and future teammates or coaches before he'd even been drafted by anyone. The goal wasn't evaluation. The goal was provocation. It was to get Shedeur Sanders to say something that could then be used as justification for decisions that were already being made for entirely different reasons. That's what Landry was describing. And once you understand that framing, the entire draft slide looks very different. Here's what makes it remarkable, though. Shedeur didn't take the bait. Not once. He navigated every single one of those conversations with composure and intelligence that, honestly, most veteran players would struggle to match in the same circumstances. Landry called it being well prepared, and that's accurate, but it's also something deeper than preparation. Preparation gets you ready for questions you anticipate. What Shedeur demonstrated was something rarer, the ability to stay grounded under questioning that was specifically designed to make him fail. He protected his relationships. He protected his reputation. He walked out of every one of those rooms having given them nothing they could use. And he did all of it while already knowing, somewhere in the back of his mind, that teams were passing on him for reasons disconnected from anything he'd actually done on a football field. Landry also pushed back hard on the idea that any of this damaged Shedeur's confidence. And I want to spend real time on this because it gets to something fundamental. When asked whether he worried about what the draft experience did to Shedeur mentally, Landry was almost dismissive of the premise. Not rudely, but with the certainty of someone who actually understands what he's talking about. He said Shedeur is a confident player. Full stop. That confidence isn't performance. It isn't packaging. It is the actual structural foundation of who this person is and what makes him capable of doing what he does. And Landry's point was clear. Shedeur should not stop being that person because the draft process tried to shrink him. What got him to this point was that confidence. What carries him forward will be that exact same quality. Fully intact, completely unbroken, and not asking anyone's permission to exist. Leonard Fournette came into this conversation from a place of genuine personal investment, and his perspective adds something important. Fournette talked about watching the TCU game, that specific Colorado game, and describing it as the moment everything shifted for him. He went from casual observer to someone who was staying up until midnight, 1 in the morning, watching Colorado games with the kind of full attention you give to something that actually matters to you personally. That is not obligatory support from someone in Shedeur's orbit. That is a football player watching another football player and being genuinely, authentically compelled by what he sees. Fournette confirmed what anyone who followed those Colorado seasons closely already knows. Those games were must-watch not because of the circus around the program, but because of the actual football. Because of how Shedeur operated under pressure, processed defenses, and consistently delivered in situations that were designed to be too large for a college player to handle. Now I want to get to Deion Sanders Jr., because what he shared is the most emotionally raw and revealing part of this entire story. This is Shedeur's older brother, someone who was physically present through the whole experience in that hotel, watching every round pass without his brother's name being called, and he's now talking about it with an honesty and vulnerability that cuts through every piece of media spin around this situation. Junior described extending his hotel stay day after day as the draft kept moving without resolution. He had planned to be there for one day, then day one ended, then day two, and he just kept staying. Not because he had to, but because leaving felt impossible. Because you don't leave your brother in a moment like that. And he used a word that hit me differently than I expected. He said he was feeling pain, not frustration, not anger, though those things were certainly present. Pain. The specific helpless kind you feel when someone you love is going through something difficult, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it, speed it past them, or absorb any part of it on their behalf. That's what Junior was sitting with in that hotel room while round after round went by. He talked about texting Shedeur and hesitating, not knowing what to say, not wanting to make things worse by drawing more attention to what was unfolding, but also feeling that pull to just be present somehow, to reach out even without the right words. Anyone who has ever watched someone they love go through public pain knows exactly that tension. There is no right thing to say, and yet the instinct to try anyway is overwhelming because silence feels like abandonment even when you're right there. What shifted the entire tone of Junior's account was the moment he described changing his understanding of what was actually happening. After a certain point, when round after round kept passing and the slide kept going beyond anything explainable by football evaluation, it stopped feeling like a setback and started feeling like something operating on a different level entirely. He made a biblical reference, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and I don't think it should be dismissed as rhetorical decoration. The idea that sometimes resistance and obstruction serve a purpose that isn't visible from inside the moment, that sometimes the door being slammed repeatedly and publicly isn't a verdict on the person trying to walk through it. It's the setup for a story that couldn't have been told any other way. And then Junior said the thing that I think will define how people look back on this years from now. He said the plan backfired. Whatever was behind the slide, whether it was coordinated resistance or independent decisions that compounded into something larger, the effect was the exact opposite of what it might have intended. Instead of diminishing Shedeur's profile, it amplified it. Instead of cooling public interest in his career, it ignited it. People who had been neutral or even mildly skeptical watched round after round pass and found themselves crossing a line they hadn't planned to cross. They started wanting him to succeed. Not because they were already in his corner, but because what they were witnessing felt wrong in a way that activated something real in them. Entire locker rooms of players with no prior connection to Shedeur Sanders became invested in his success, simply because of what they watched during those draft hours. Junior described watching people who had previously been critical or dismissive visibly change in real time as the rounds kept advancing. The tone of coverage on major platforms shifted. People who had spent months building cases against his readiness or his character started publicly acknowledging that something unusual was happening. And Junior's read is that this was ultimately a net positive, not in spite of the pain it caused, but in some complicated way because of it. The underdog status Shedeur now carries is real, legitimate, and earned in the most public way imaginable. And for a player with his talent and his drive, that is not a disadvantage. That is fuel in its purest form. Junior also said something about Shedeur's relationship with football itself that I think is worth sitting with carefully. He recalled a specific conversation at a fair in Dallas where the topic of real estate came up and Shedeur's response was immediate and completely unambiguous. He didn't care about real estate right now. Football was what he cared about. Junior's point was that people consistently underestimate the depth of that focus, the degree to which Shedeur Sanders is genuinely, constitutionally, fundamentally about football in a way that isn't common even among elite players. That kind of singular focus doesn't get broken by a draft slide. It doesn't get redirected by external noise or media treatment or whatever organizational politics drove those picks. It finds its channel and flows through every obstacle because the commitment underneath it isn't conditional on favorable circumstances. It doesn't require the situation to be fair before it activates. It just runs. What I keep coming back to after absorbing all of this, what Landry said about the unfairness and the composure, what Fournette said about staying up past midnight watching Colorado games, what Junior said about the pain in the hotel and the eventual realization that it was going to mean something, is how extraordinarily consistent the picture is. Every person with genuine proximity to this situation is describing the same human being. A player with unshakable internal confidence who doesn't need external validation to maintain his sense of who he is and what he's capable of. A player who processes pressure without letting it rearrange his fundamental orientation toward the game. A player whose love for football is not a marketing message, but an actual organizing principle of how he lives. The composure Shedeur showed during those pre-draft interviews is the same quality that will let him stand in a hostile road environment with a packed crowd trying to rattle him and deliver the throw anyway. The mental steadiness he maintained while watching himself slide past picks that objective observers couldn't justify on any football basis is the same quality that will carry him through a fourth quarter deficit without that deficit becoming a psychological weight. These things are not separate. Character expressed under pressure in one context is character available in every context. And what the draft process, for all its ugliness, accidentally did was put Shedeur Sanders through one of the most visible public pressure tests a young player can face and give the entire football world an unobstructed look at exactly who he is when circumstances are working hard against him. He didn't collapse. He didn't react. He didn't hand the people who were clearly hoping for a breaking point the satisfaction of seeing one. He stayed exactly who he was, walked through the other side, and landed in Cleveland carrying a foundation of genuine public support that no amount of pre-draft narrative management could have manufactured from scratch. He has veterans in his corner who understand this league from the inside. He has players across the league who watched what happened and made a choice about whose side they were on. He has a brother who stayed in that hotel room day after day, extending his checkout, who now looks back at those painful hours and sees the beginning of something that was always going to matter. The NFL tried to use the draft as the mechanism for delivering a verdict on Shedeur Sanders. And what actually happened is that the process became the setup for a story that is now significantly more compelling than anything a clean, celebrated top 5 selection would have produced. The whole football world is watching, not just the fans who were already there, but the ones who came late, brought by the sheer weight of what they witnessed during those days. That is not a consolation prize. That is a competitive advantage walking into Cleveland, carried by a player who was already going to be difficult to stop. Now he brings something extra to every single snap, and everyone in that building knows exactly where it came from.